Hi, everyone. I've got a very quick and exciting announcement here. We're hosting our very first ever in-person meetup on November 7th from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. in Denver at the ASHG conference. It's going to be a fantastic opportunity for past guests, future guests, listeners, and friends of the show to come together, share ideas, and chat about all things genetics and precision medicine. We have reserved a very cool venue. We're going to have free food and drinks, and there's going to be a lot of interesting people in attendance. We're sharing this event first with listeners of the podcast as well as past guests. So if you can be there, please register as soon as possible because the spaces are limited. You can register at lu.ma/geneticspodASHG, all lowercase, no spaces or dashes in any of the words. The link to register is also in the show notes and it's easy to use on your phone. Again, that's lu.ma/geneticspodASHG, all lowercase. Mark your calendars, come say hi, and I can't wait to meet many of you in person. One of the challenges of podcasting is you often have absolutely no clue who the listeners are on the other end, except those of you who I really appreciate who drop me an email or say something on LinkedIn. But that's actually a very small minority of people. So if you can't make this meetup for any reason, but you really like the idea, then please don't hesitate to drop me an email at patrick@sonogenetics.com just to say hi. Let us know where you're based so we can keep it in mind for future meetups. And if people like this sort of thing, then we're going to plan to do more in the future. So thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you there. Hello and welcome to the Genetics Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Short. My background is in population genomics and studying the genetic causes of rare disease. I did my PhD at the Sanger Institute in the University of Cambridge and have been in biotech since 2018 when I started Sonogenetics. Sonogenetics helps academic and industry researchers to run large-scale genetic testing programs that speed up their clinical trials, generate data sets for the next big breakthrough, and give participants the best possible experience taking part in research. Each episode of the Genetics Podcast, we bring you insights from the leading minds in genetics and precision medicine, including household names and Nobel Prize winners, as well as early career scientists and biotechs working on the next big breakthrough. Whether you are a scientist, entrepreneur, executive, patient advocate, or simply someone curious about how genetics shapes our world, you're in the right place. Thank you for listening, and let's get started. Welcome, everyone, to the Genetics Podcast. I'm so excited to be here today with Noam Baumatz, who is the co-founder and CEO of Noga Therapeutics, which is dedicated to developing gene therapies for rare genetic diseases, particularly today focused on genetically engineered macrophages. We're going to talk a little bit about Noam's story and his journey into starting the company, which tragically begins very personally. First of all, welcome to the podcast, but I would just love if you could give everyone a sense of what motivates you and how you got into doing the work that you do today.
Yeah, hi Patrick, and it's a pleasure being here. As you said, I'm the co-founder and the CEO of a company that is dedicated to rare but also to severe diseases. And really, this journey that I'm pacing in now started as in some cases the way it happens, and you might sympathize with that. Started with finding out that my daughter was suffering from a rare and fatal disease, and that's really, I think, really brought me to this field of rare diseases in particular and gene therapy in particular as well, and really that's what led me here. But really, it started as it sometimes starts with just having a beautiful child, and although very quite small, but she was, just she had the chance of having a life in which she didn't suffer much from her illness. And I know it's not always the case, but she lived a happy and a good life, I think. But it did start with just like being sick a lot and having a spastic stomach aches and waking up at night just crying. And for me as a father, she was my third child. I could see that there is something wrong. But we really don't think of options that are so extreme, or at least myself, I'm not a pessimistic guy. But seeing her suffering the way she did really light, this red light came about, and we started checking. And It took us a few months, and we have good doctors, and it took us about 6 months to understand that she has a colitis, which is really rare for a child. No child should be suffering from IBD. And when the doctor, who is a good friend of mine, understood that she's suffering from colitis, he said, have a look at this article, and really, and that is a moment that you just read and you understand this idea that you might, and it says, yeah, if there is an illness like that, it's mostly genetic, and if it's genetic, it's mostly fatal. And just really remembering this moment that it happened is something that still comes to me, and I still remember. And I think it's an experience that many parents for rare disease, they share this experience of this moment that they understand uh, what happens, basically. So it took us a few months to understand, yeah, it looks bad. And then about 6 months, another 6 months to understand what the mutation is. So altogether it took, well, I would say 8 to 12 months to understand what she has. And then when you get this understanding, when you get this diagnosis, that is usually the end of the line for most parents of people of children with rare disease. And that's, I think, this understanding and this moment sitting in front of the geneticist. And, we were waiting for that diagnosis and sitting in front of the geneticist and just understanding, oh, actually, you won't say anything that I didn't read on the internet. And actually, there's nothing you can do. And I think this experience really started, I would say, kind of building something inside of me. So we were fighting, we were running around fighting for our life, mainly trying to get a bone marrow transplant, which should have helped. But she was too little, and we didn't get authorization for that. She could not withstand the the conditioning regime, and perhaps not our illnesses, GVHD, graft versus host disease, which is a terrible disease that is actually fatal for many children who've gone through a bone marrow transplant. So she was not eligible for that. And for a father, knowing that this is really the only option and then getting a refusal, and then that is almost unbearable, but then understanding that there is actually something you can do. And her being really alone, she was the only one at that time, the only one in the world. So there is something you can do, but it's actually out of your scope financially. And so that is something your parents sometimes is not really going to accept. So I was really going for that and understanding that the gene therapy, and maybe we'll talk about therapies for rare disease, or just basically the therapy that Noga was, I planned Noga to go through. It is something that I really fought for, and then there was another year and a half that I just, her situation kind of deteriorated. And so we were hospitalized most of the time, but I already gathered finance and started working in the lab. So it was kind of a crazy
Yeah.
year with glimpse of hope. And but then winter came, and we all feared the winter, and winter did arrive, and she just didn't make it. And but I think losing her really ignited me to where I am now. But I would say even before that, uh, being in the world of rare diseases is a hard task. And I think the really tough part of it is that you understand there's not much you can do. And and I think there was a moment there that I thought, yeah, perhaps gene therapy. And then I went and started meeting people in the community of rare disease. So you have kind of association that you can
Yeah.
meet. They support plans like that. And I started meeting those people, and I think it was such kind of a heavy load was lifted from my shoulder. Just meeting parents and being absorbed in this sense of togetherness. And actually, it was the beginning, I would say, the reemergence of the world of gene therapy.
Yeah.
So there was hope as well. So you have all this energy that is really being concentrated in this group of people who deal with rare diseases. And it was just an incredible feeling, a feeling of hope and of just meeting brothers in some sense. And I think I was really I was so much immersed into this experience that I wanted more of it. And so even after losing Noga, I was already kind of into this doing gene therapy and doing something for her. And it was a high profile type of project because I needed to get funds and and so we were escorted all the time by TV crew and radio
Right.
shows and all that. And so doctors came over and parents came over, and I don't know, I just started being more and more immersed into this thing. And then we had a connection with Schneider Hospital. That's a hospital here in the country, and we came and we started working on this rare disease with patients who suffer a type of a bubble kid. If you know
Yeah.
the term, those kids, they don't have the immune system at all. So really, they start well, feeding on their mother's milk. They have all the antibodies they need, but as soon as they stop breastfeeding, they start getting sick, and they they don't succeed to do. I mean, they don't live for that long, and now they're getting treatments that keep them alive for a few years. But again, it was so we started working on that disease, and we are still doing that. We are focusing on develop. Well, we are focusing on human cells right now, and that will be a beginning for a clinical trial. But yeah, I think that this experience of being a father for a child with a rare disease and then meeting up with parents and with families is something that is still very much an engine inside of me. And I think in some ways this, the rare those this combination of rare cases and not much to do, because really 90% of diseases of syndromes don't have any cure, really is something that I'm trying to be a part of and trying to do something in and trying to create some kind of hope to other parents, but also really kind of a therapeutic experience for myself
Yes.
uh, of trying to really, I don't know, give hope or maybe even succeed to beat this really terrible fate.
Now you've been working at the biotech company Noga Therapeutics, which obviously is named after your daughter Noga.
Yeah.
What have you learned over the last few years transitioning from, and we're going to go into your career prior to this in a moment, but transitioning into obviously doing everything you can to try to fight for your daughter, now into actually trying to solve a problem more systematically. Talk a little bit about the problem you're trying to solve around um, essentially reprogramming of blood stem cells, which your daughter wasn't able to take advantage of because of the reasons that you mentioned, like graft versus host disease and how young she was. But just talk about a little bit about this program or this problem as a whole. How many rare diseases does it affect, generally speaking, and how are you going about tackling it?
Yeah, so I think the we can say that there is group of about 400 subsections of diseases that attack the immune system. So they're all PIDs, they're all it's called primary immune deficiencies, and there's a huge group of a list of disease where illnesses like that occur. And I think to some extent, working on the bone marrow and engineering the bone marrow should help most of them. But of course, I don't know, of course, you know that, but in rare disease, we do have a division, we can say, of diseases where the mutation leads to a gain of function mutation phenotype, and there are mutations where there is a loss of function phenotype. And when you go and you look at the rare disease or a genetic disease, I would say that's the first thing you want to find out.
Yeah.
Because if it's a loss of function, yeah. So what we do is really accurate. We're gonna change and modify those stem cells, and we're gonna have a new blood, you can say.
Yeah.
Just as much as with a bone marrow transplant, you would have new blood. Of course, without all the problems that comes with the bone marrow transplant. But if what is the case when there is a gain of function problem, then that's a different story, and really you cannot address it at the same way. So you have antisense and you have other types of therapy that may be useful. But
Why can't you go in and correct the gain of function in the DNA of the stem cell, for example? What's the barrier for going to do something like that?
well, I would say that's really something with stem cells, but also with some of the AAVs or the CRISPR that is emerging. It's a question. Sometimes if you can just do a knockout of a gene that should solve the problem, if the other side, of course, if the haplopart, if the other side of the gene is sufficient. But I think in terms of bone marrow problem, there are attempts to do a knockout, and this is something that sometimes helps. But I think in terms of the illnesses, doing knockout on bone on stem cells will really knock out the whole system. So you don't have this haplo part of it that will continue work. So you can do with CRISPR, and that's what people do sometimes, kind of upstream effect that will diminish it, but not completely. But we will see if it works. So far, it's a problem correcting it, and I don't think there are any attempts to correct it in such a way just to say, all right, so we're just going to knock out this gene expression altogether, and that's it, because the haplopart won't be sufficient.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that makes sense.
But and I think that is the case in many of the other gain of function mutations, where the knockout is not really valid, and you have to have some kind of. So we didn't mention other problems of targeting the right cells and all that, but of course with bone marrow, that's the easy thing. You can just target those cells. It's fine. But I would say it's a major problems with viruses-based gene therapies. If the haplo, if you just will you not shut out the whole expression of the gene? That's a major problem. Yeah, but what we're doing really can help many of the primary immune deficiencies, and that's, I think, it's terrible to say, but many times it's a case of a financial problem, because there are 400, but very small numbers, and each one of them needs their own, I would say, gene correction, and each one has their own, I would say, problem. So what we were working on XLA, an overexpression is contribute and is associated with well, there are fears that it's associated with cancer, but it is definitely causes lupus or other autoimmune problems. So you cannot have an overexpression of that, and and of course you cannot have an underexpression, that a limited expression, because that won't do any work. So you have to really kind of combine all these things together, and it was not always easy. So we did this project and we have good results. We are very proud of them, and we are waiting to check it on human cells. But there were about 8 programs at the same level before us, and some of them were working CRISPR, some of them were doing AAV, some of them were doing HSCs, and and it never worked. So we are really latching into advancement in the field of gene therapy, understanding promoters and understanding really a good side effect, where you know that you can really have a good effect with a low vector copy number, meaning you don't have so many viruses entering the gene and kind of delivering this cassette.
Yeah.
So you have to keep quite a low vector copy number, but still have a therapeutic effect. And I think it's not that easy. I think there were attempts, and there are attempts all the time. It's still a medicine that is evolving. So I would say, yeah, what we do uh, can contribute to many immune and rare immune illnesses, but it's not always easy to do
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, can I
And
let me just if I can just summarize it to make sure I'm getting it right, and you let me know if I've missed anything there. So XLA, I'm it's X-linked A gamma
gamma
globulinemia.
globulinemia, yeah,
You've pronounced that many times clearly. So
indeed,
it's
but
X-linked, obviously. So patients have lost function in the one copy. It's typically boys, I guess, that are affected by the disease. So they've lost function in their one copy, and you're kind of you're pulling the cells out, and then you're introducing basically a viral vector that has a healthy copy of the gene, and then putting the stem cells back in where they then express the missing gene. Have I got that right, or have I missed a
yeah,
detail?
yeah, yeah. It's a really the procedure is that you take out those stem cells, you inject some kind of a sugar, and those cells leave the marrow and they start moving around in the blood system. Then you do an apheresis, which is type of a dialysis,
Yeah.
that you take those cells and you modify them outside of the body, and you leave them for 2 days. You do some tests on them for another week or two, and and then you just put it back in an infusion, and those cells, they find their way to the niche of the bone marrow, and then they start producing healthy blood cells. But you always need, and that's a thing I think that was not always that approached until now. You have to have a very good expression in a very specific lineage of the hematopoietic stem cell, because you don't want this protein to be expressed too much.
Mm,
So it will only be expressed on B cells, or what we do now is only being expressed on macrophage, or even a specific type of macrophage. And all these things, those are advancement in this field. But yeah, what we do is that we modify those cells and we bring them back, and then you check it in the lab. So you do it on animal model, and basically those people, they don't produce any antibodies, and so you inject them with the vaccine, and you see, all right, will this mouse start creating his own antibodies? And it's just a beautiful thing to see that you have this new ability,
yeah.
and that is an amazing thing with the gene modification. Yeah. So yeah, that is what we're doing, and I think it was kind of a first shot in this field, and it is something that is now kind of being a bit wider now, and I think it's not only us. Yeah, it is a whole field in the world of gene therapy and in the world of medicine, where actually you take those hematopoietic stem cells, those stem cells that actually are supposed to make, you know, they're going to be blood, and you're going to teach them a new ability. And when you do that, you can really target many other diseases. So we have two drugs that have been approved last year, right, for all kinds of, it's called lysosome storage disease. Those are rare disease where the body doesn't produce and doesn't accumulate some kind of lysosome, and then you start having accumulation of material. And it's usually in the brain, not only, and it's usually a terrible neurological disease. So basically what those drugs do is that they do exactly the same thing, taking out cells from the body, modifying them outside, expressing something in a specific lineage of those hematopoietic stem cells. But now they will express perhaps a gene that is missing, or perhaps an enzyme that you can be expressed in the brain. And we have good drugs now that attack MLD and CALD. Those are, again, neurological deficiencies, and those are fatal. It takes a few years, but those are fatal. And those drugs really, they do the trick. They can really help them, and I think they do it dramatically. And this is something that gene therapy was not always able to provide, this dramatic expression of health. So if we work on blood cells and we let's say a child won't have any immune system, and we fix it, so this child is going to be just fine. He's going to go home after one treatment, and that's it. He won't be sick anymore. But I think in other fields of gene therapy, the case was not always so. And you had problems where, obviously, when there are deficits, most of them, they are not reversible. So that is something that happened. But also the effect in many of those drugs was not complete. And I know it because I read, but also because, part of my life now has to do with many parents and reading and connecting to research that is happening. And I see that it's not always an amazing cure. Sometimes you won't see an improvement that is large, or sometimes, as we say, even if you're going to block the progress of the disease, you're going to still have many. And I'm meeting parents, so I see parents, and I see parents that. So we have a few drugs that are around for a few years now, and I see parents, and I remember seeing two parents, and their child is not running, but is playing in the sea with their brother, and there is a wheelchair next to it. And I say, what? Why? And they say, yeah, it's SMA, spinal muscular atrophy. That's a terrible disease, right? It's kids who have it, they will die when they are 8, maybe, but slowly the progression will be so kind of debilitating that their life is going to be just terrible. And this child is playing. She's alive. She's well, and she's playing with her brother, and that's an amazing. But there's a wheelchair, and she will always be with a wheelchair. And the mother, you can see her saying, "Yeah, that's good. That's all right." But it didn't really solve the problem, right?
Yeah. You mentioned a big challenge that it sounded like you ran into as a father trying to find a solution for your daughter, but also you're going to be confronted with as a biotech CEO and part of this industry, which is the big disconnect between the incredible transformative therapies we have, but also the ultra rare diseases and the drug prices and the market sizes. How do you think about us solving this problem as an industry? Because if we just take PIDs, for example, primary immunodeficiencies, as you mentioned, we've got 400. potentially diseases that individually are extremely rare. And we've got a couple of different, modalities now that we can think about what you've described, but also some of the other approaches that you've mentioned that could, in the next decade or two, treat all of these diseases. But we have a market challenge, which is how do we get these paid for in a way that families can afford, that doesn't bankrupt health systems, but also make sure that the industry invests in them because they won't necessarily do so without having some understanding of what the return on the significant investment is going to be. So how do you think about breaking that down? What do we need to do to solve that problem?
Yeah, yeah. So I think to begin with, I think there is a lack of acceptance of the prices, which are extremely high. Yeah, but I think there is a lack of acceptance of the prices if the therapy is not that useful, right?
Yeah.
Because even if they say, all right, it's a lot of money, but we will pay for it. But hey, I want to see, I want to see that it works, and more, perhaps on financial level, I want to see that I don't invest any more money rather than this drug, because right, that's really the financial reason behind many of the drug prices. They say,
Yeah.
hey, those are expensive, but it's going to cost you much more if you're not going to. So I guess there's that insurance company saying, all right, so yeah, perhaps you have a point, but if it doesn't help, then what's your point? So I think the acceptance of everything has to do with really how effectful those drugs are, and then you need to take down the prices really, really a lot. And I think there are ways to do that. And those ways are just by manufacturing in cheaper places and doing the research, perhaps in places that are cheaper. We do our research and some of the work in Israel, and it cost us, I would say, a third of the price than in the States.
Hmm.
And then producing those vector again about quarter of the price, etc. So really I think you can take down the prices. And finally, there will be ways of perhaps finding ways of perhaps reaching, as you mentioned, a broader spectrum of a cluster of diseases with one drug. And that's something we try to work on at Noga as well, because we think that this, it is just an approach that if you're gonna, so let's say if you're gonna work on lung issues, yeah. So you have a whole cluster of disease that they all, let's say, have kind of same characteristics in terms of the enzyme that is missing, yeah, or in terms of just having an inflammation at the same areas. So if you can really, and that's an effort because let's take the example of surfactants. That's a substance that is really, I would say, missing in many of the pulmonary diseases. But if you're going to give those kids surfactant, it's not necessarily that it will help, right? Even if you do it in an early stage, because the genetic problem sometimes is, I would say, it has a broad effect on the body. So you may have a missing surfactant, but you may have also a missing ability to absorb surfactant. So you have all these things, and every disease really has her own characteristic. But if you can really kind of go on a whole cluster and say, all right, yeah, we know each one has his own problem of absorbing surfactant, but you all have the same problem of absorbing surfactant, even if the I would say the reasons may be different. So if we can add this gene in our cassette and just promote uh, the cell activity, perhaps we can really tackle a whole broad spectrum of disease. And this is something we think of. And I think, and at the end, you will have all together. You will have a good drugs capability, and you can make it slightly cheaper. And And if you're going to reach a whole cluster of disease, then the numbers will go up, and the research won't be so expensive per patient. And so I think the whole thing together will happen eventually. Eventually. But even now, I think prices can be cheaper. I mean, we're working on a treatment for diseases such as Parkinson, with a majority of major population. And of course, the prices will be much cheaper. I mean, the prices can be cheaper. And well, you have drugs with the same mechanism for cancer, right? Or the CAR T drugs. Those are expensive, very expensive in compared to regular drugs that you can take, regular chemotherapy. But still, there is an acknowledgement of the system, yeah, that it works, and they'll pay $150,000 for a treatment that works very well.
Yeah.
So I think the whole thing combined, the treatment that is effective, that is long lasting, that targets a cluster of disease, all those things will help the acceptance of gene therapy.
Yeah, yeah, I like that framing. I wanted to come back to your background prior to doing this, actually, because you spent a good chunk of your career actually working in Chinese medicine. You spent some time at a clinic in London, and then also in Israel, where you are now. I'd love to just hear a little bit about what your background is in that very different branch of medicine, and what you think
Right.
that precision medicine and gene therapy and what we have can learn from Chinese medicine or Eastern medicine more broadly, where you've spent also a big chunk of your career.
Yes. Yeah, well, that's an amazing question, and I'm not sure I can answer it so well, but I will try. But in general, I'll say, yeah. Before this earthquake happened to me, I was working for I would say 20 years, even 25 years in the world of the Chinese medicine, here in a hospital in Israel, but also in my own private clinic and in London, as you said. And and I think in many ways I have and I see that when I meet with my scientists and just talking with people, I think for people like me who are therapists by nature, the ability of the treatments are really what drives us going.
Mm.
So for me, I'm very interested in the world of gene therapy. I was always, even as a child and also in my science studies, gene therapy was always a thing for me. But I think I see it much more as a therapist who just have this really cool tool to help people. And of course there is immediacy when you treat a person. When you give acupuncture, then you see a result just in front of your eyes. This is something amazing. And over here, it will take a few years, but still the rationale will be the same. Being a therapist, trying to teach, to reach people, trying to make them feel better, try to solve all these, really mysteries of why is a person sick. And I think this is really something that it's inside of me. Being a therapist is it's not always as being a scientist. So it's very kind of interested in the science and in the kind of the I mean all the pain and the enjoyment of you just working in the lab and seeing that what you do helps. And for me, and I think that's part of why I'm in the field of rare disease. For me, the connection with people and the chance that I can give them, and seeing a child and saying, all right, me myself, perhaps I can help him, but more than that, can anybody help him?
Yeah.
Any therapy that is happening? And just seeing this thing of trying to reach this child and help him and help the family. I think it is something that I keep that is kept inside of me since those early days. But also, sometimes the science is well, I would say there are connections with the Chinese understanding of health and of organs. And so let's say they say, all right, the lungs and the intestine, they're very similar. That is something that you say when you work on Chinese medicine, they come from the same, they are connected to the same element, and they are a pair, a yin and a yang, the the lungs and the intestine. So when you start working and looking at indication and thing and say, all right, so we go for the lungs. What about the intestine? What about IBD? What is the connection? Are there cells? Are they really connected? And many times you find that there is a reason behind their approach. And it is because they were clinician and they saw that there is a relationship, and not always that we see this relationship, but so I find it happens.
Yeah.
But more than anything, I think this understanding, this holistic understanding that comes from Chinese medicine, that you treat the body you don't just treat you don't treat the manifestation of a disease, but you look at the principle. Why? What is the base problem? What is the reason behind this problem? And
Yeah.
I think this is very much what lured me in the world of genetics, because you really look and you say, all right, what's the reason? What's the origin of the problem? So I think in that sense, both styles of medicine are holistic, and I
Yes.
like it a lot in gene therapy as much as I like it in Chinese medicine.
Yeah, I like that tie-in, but I also think the point you made, sometimes modern medicine can accidentally be very reductive, right? We tend to focus in on the gene, the target, and obviously great doctors, great drug developers do come out and think holistically and think about all the organ systems that are affected. It's part of what we do, but I think there's a tendency, the deeper you go into the science, the more you can put blinders on a little bit, and it becomes a little bit reductive. But one of the things I
Yeah,
really like
yeah,
about genetics is that you are getting at, especially in rare monogenic diseases, you're getting at the root cause of these in some fundamental way. So if you can understand that, then you can do something hopefully very profound.
yeah. But even if you don't, even if without not in a monogenic disease, but let's say multifactorial disease, still, if you're gonna source something from the base ground, it's
Yeah.
gonna work for life, and it's gonna just, yeah, it's just they're gonna be better forever. It's not a drug that you take, uh, but something. So if you're gonna affect the intestine, you, you attempt to solve the problem. Nothing, well, maybe solving the problem is a bit too much, but really, you want the patient to feel healthy. You
Yeah.
want him to take drugs. So what we do with Parkinson is similar, right? Because we do something that is quite superficial. We let those cells, those hematopoietic stem cells, the ones that reach the brain, we teach them how to produce dopamine. So that's all you do, basically. You don't even solve the problem, right? The degradation will continue
Yeah.
probably, although we try to think of that as well. But in some sense, you say, all right, so I give this patient a good life. You won't have to suffer from the drugs, and there are terrible, terrible side effects when you are a Parkinson patient with drugs. The fluctuation of dopamine is just crazy. When you take it, it's really goes high, and then you become catatonic or manic or with hallucination, and then it goes down, and this fluctuation is just horrible. And you say, all right, so I'm gonna do something quite major for him. I'm not gonna solve the problem, but still this idea that, yeah, you can help a lot of diseases. So even if you didn't solve it, but if you took it from the base ground and you say, all right, so I have this, that's my strategy, then it's going to make a huge difference, I think, in many diseases that are not necessarily monogenic. So I think, yes, this is a huge impact. And obviously, there are many questions about that, and many problems when you try to create a drug. And we can talk about so many that
Yeah.
we are facing and we will face. But this idea that you do something from the background is amazing. And I think again, it's just a root of hope for rare patients and their family.
You mentioned a point there that I just wanted to follow up on, which was one of the other special things about the rare disease community is people help one another. It's much more collaborative than competitive. And on that note, I just wanted to ask if there are other, people who are maybe in the position you were in 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and thinking about whether they, apply some of the life learnings that they've had from having a family member affected to go into biotech, whether they're a patient organization or an early biotech CEO or founder. How can people get in touch with you? What kinds of people do you want to hear from?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm seeing a lot of parents and families, and I really see myself as someone who that's one of his main passion. Seeing if there can be anything that anyone can help, and I'm always open to hear. And my mail is really blocked, but you can always find me on LinkedIn. That's just write my name, Noam Baumatz, and you can get in touch with me. There's if I don't know what and if, but definitely it is something that I'm always keen on hearing and seeing if I can assist somehow.
Wonderful. Yeah, well, thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation. I learned a lot and
Enjoyed it.
appreciate you taking, these things that have happened to you and applying it to do something amazing in the world.
That's great. It's a great experience for me, and it's definitely something very therapeutic for me. And I thank you for the chance to meet you and speak with you.
My pleasure. That wraps up this week's episode of the Genetics Podcast. I'd like to give a huge thank you to our guests for sharing their valuable insights and experience. And thank you as well to our listeners, as always, for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's talk, the number one thing I would really appreciate from you is if you could share it with a friend or colleague who you think would enjoy it as well. We would also really appreciate if you could subscribe to our show and give us a quick rate and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. Both of these things help us become more visible when people search for genetics and precision medicine podcasts. And we're always eager to hear from you. Please reach out to us with any questions or feedback on social media. You can find Sanogenetics on Twitter, LinkedIn, or visit sanogenetics.com. Finally, a big thank you to the team behind the scenes who make all this possible. In particular, Amy Cousins and Sonia Shah, who produced the show, and James Pierce from Selective Frequencies, who handles the audio engineering. I'm Patrick Short, your host, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you, and we'll see you next time on the Genetics Podcast.